Big shout out to everybody at the International Mining Symposium. Happened the last 2 days here in London, England, where I am recording as we speak. What a joy to see everybody in the flesh. There is no substitute for that real-world interaction for all the Teams and the Zoom meetings we might have. Once again, I am reminded there is still value in real-world encounters. Hello and welcome to the Northern Miner Podcast. My name's Adrian Pocobelli. And speaking of the real world, Alicia Hyatt, who has been with the Northern Miner for 2 decades, the editor-in-chief, is moving on. And I do want to highlight that and just wish Alicia all the best. And just a few lines from her final editorial posted on November 27th. This will be my last editorial for the Northern Miner after 19 years here and with its sister publications. In December, I'm off to start another adventure outside of mining. And then Alicia starts going into her history, and I encourage you to go to the Northern Miner website and find this article, again dated November 27th. She highlights some of the big themes that have taken hold over the last 19 years with her working at the Northern Miner. And here they are. Attention to diversity. So there has been a shift in the last 19 years. I guess that wouldn't be a huge surprise to many of us who have been paying attention to the entire news cycle. And it goes beyond mining, doesn't it? We have seen the world pay more attention to diversity in recent years. Also, Canada's declining diamond sector. And we have a story at the end of our news stories. I will try and touch on it if there's time. Just another example of the difficulties of the diamond sector. So very interesting. Another theme Alicia highlights from the last 20 years, retail investor migration. As she says, while discount brokerages have made do-it-yourself investing easy and cheap for retail investors, it's not exploration plays that they're buying anymore. And to Alicia's point, it has been a difficult climate for retail investors, particularly in the exploration plays. And finally, Alicia mentions the rise in critical minerals. And indeed, probably since COVID, we have seen a real attention to the supply chain, which is what we're about to touch on here in our next story. As we take another journey here through the mining sector in just a week, so much has happened. So again, just a big salute and best of luck to Alicia Hyatt. Continuing on the theme of critical minerals, as Alicia has highlighted, Joe Biden has arrived in Angola. And here is the story from the Associated Press. Thousands cheer Biden's arrival in Angola for his long-promised sub-Saharan Africa visit. President Joe Biden arrived for his long-awaited first presidential visit to sub-Saharan Africa on Monday to the cheers of thousands in Angola, where he will highlight an ambitious U.S.-backed railway project meant to counter China's influence on the continent of over 1.4 billion people. Biden's 3-day visit to Angola will focus largely on the Libido Corridor railway redevelopment in Zambia, Congo, and Angola. It aims to advance the U.S. presence in a region rich in the critical minerals used in batteries for electric vehicles, electronic devices, and clean energy technologies. I mean, really what we see there is copper. It's really a railway from the copper belt into the western side of Africa where Angola sits to the Libido port. So it can be shipped off really to Europe and the United States, to paraphrase. And just scrolling down a bit, Biden plans to meet with Angolan President João Lourenço in the capital Luanda, where crowds line the street for his arrival, and visit the National Slavery Museum. He will also travel to the Atlantic port city of Libido for a look at the rail project. He will announce new developments on health, agribusiness, security, White House officials said. And finally, just a quote from National Security spokesman John Kirby, who told reporters on board Air Force One on the way to Angola, quote, "I just kind of push back on the premise that this is some Johnny-come-lately trip at the very end. This is something Biden has been focused on since he became president of the United States," end quote. So a lot of attention now being placed on this Libido corridor. I mean, it really hasn't gotten that much attention until really in the last few months that it started to get what you might call a more of a mainstream discussion point where now most people who are paying attention to the mining sector are now familiar with the Libido corridor. Interestingly, I mean, that's one of the takeaways from this conference. And when you talk to people, people know this, whereas I don't think 13 months ago this was necessarily a top of mind discussion point. I mean, it's interesting to see how the African continent is dominating the resource discussion, at least in this program today. So we've been seeing these, detainments in Mali, and we have another detainment, and it's back to Barrick. I had to do a double take on the date on this story because I wasn't sure if this is the story from 6 weeks ago, but this is new. 4 Malian employees with Barrick have been arrested. So here we go again. And here's the press release from Barrick, November 26th. Barrick confirms arrest of 4 Malian employees, reaffirms commitment to resolution of disputes. Barrick Gold Corporation today confirmed that 4 employees of its Loulo-Gounkoto mining complex had been charged and detained pending trial. While Barrick refutes these charges, it said it would continue to engage with the Malian government to find an amicable dispute settlement that would ensure the long-term sustainability of the complex. And don't forget, it has come up in this story, I believe Barrick offered as high as 55% of the profits to be given to the Malian government, and I believe they refused, interestingly. So let's continue this very short press release here. President and Chief Executive Mark Bristow said that since September 30th, the company had been actively seeking to finalize a memorandum of agreement that would guide Barrick's partnership with the government in the future, including the state share of the economic benefits generated by the complex and the legal framework under which this would be managed. And here is the quote from Bristow, quote, "Our attempts to find a mutually acceptable resolution have so far been unsuccessful, but we remain committed to engage with the government in order to resolve all the claims levied against the company and its employees and secure the early release of our unjustly imprisoned colleagues," end quote, he said. So the rhetoric is getting a little hotter with the unjustly imprisoned colleagues. You do get the sense that Bristow's patience is starting to wear thin here because, this kind of looked like a shakedown from the beginning to editorialize here. With this continuous quote-unquote detainment of employees, it is reinforcing that perception of shakedown. Another related story, this is courtesy of the Northern Miner. Resolute pays $50 million US to Mali junta amid tax spat. And this is Blair McBride, November 29th. Resolute Mining has made the second settlement payment of about $50 million US to the Malian government to help resolve a tax dispute, the company said Friday. The Australian miner expects to pay a further $30 million US by the end of the year from liquidity sources. Resolute last week paid $80 million US before the military government released 3 company executives, including CEO Terence Holohan, who had been detained since November 8th, concerning payments for Resolute's Syama gold mine. The company agreed to pay a total of around $160 million under a memorandum of understanding or protocol signed with authorities on November 18th. It lays out a framework on the long-term future of its operations in the West African country. So one wonders how this is all going to play out. The problem here, again, to editorialize is what leverage does Barrick and Resolute have in this situation? If they're in a foreign country and the government decides that they have not paid enough, whatever the number is, what really is the recourse here? Is there a WTO type recourse? And if you go down that road, it's kind of like, see you in a few years, this mine is shut down. It sounds like a pretty difficult situation. Imagine you tell your employees, okay, everybody has to leave. We're not safe here anymore. Can you even get out of the country? Will they even let you leave at this point? Terry Holohan has left. So this is looking like a pretty difficult situation, and I'm not sure where the leverage is here from the mining companies. It seems like all of the power is in the government's hands here. Continuing on the African continent, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the M23 rebels reject Angola-mediated ceasefire. So this was a ceasefire that was negotiated between Rwanda, who is thought to be supporting the M23, but who has denied it, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has been mediated by Angola. Now, interestingly, if the M23 are on their own or a separate entity, maybe it doesn't make a difference if the DRC and Rwanda make a peace deal. Because if the M23 rebels reject it, then I guess they weren't at the table. And it kind of highlights the ambiguity, really, of the M23 rebels in regard to this entire political situation. And one wonders, let's say Rwanda had been supporting the M23. It brings back, Machiavelli's The Prince. If you bring in foreign armies to help you out, you're not necessarily able to control them. And they actually can potentially be a threat to yourself. And so let's say Rwanda was funding the M23. With the M23, as we've seen in previous stories, talking about taxing local residents, in other words, declaring, themselves almost as sovereign. One wonders at what point the M23 would stay loyal to Rwanda if Rwanda had in fact been, let's say, sponsors of the M23. So let's take a little look at this. This is courtesy of Google News. Fighting erupted on Friday in Kikubo, Lubero territory between M23 and the armed forces of the DRC, underscoring the fragile state of the ceasefire. The Alliance Fleuve Congo, or AFC/M23, has refused to fully adhere to the Angola-mediated ceasefire aimed at resolving the ongoing conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. In a communiqué dated November 30th, 2024, the group accused the Kinshasa regime of breaching the truce and declared its right to, quote, defend ourselves and neutralize threats at their source to protect the civilian population, end quote. The ceasefire, brokered by Angolan President João Lourenço under the African Union's mandate, is part of a wider concept of operations signed on November 20th by the DRC and Rwanda. And with Biden visiting Angola, one imagines this is going to come up in discussion. Let's continue. The plan outlines a phased process to address the conflict, including analyzing threats posed by the FDLR and their locations, neutralizing FDLR forces through targeted actions, assessing progress jointly between the DRC and Rwanda, stabilizing the region via demobilization, repatriation, and normalization of relations. However, M23 statements highlights deep mistrust, claiming, quote, numerous violations of commitment perpetrated by the Kinshasa regime, end quote, with recent attacks allegedly targeting densely populated areas in Lubero and Masisi territories. So at least in terms of the official positioning here, it seems like the M23 rebels are acting independently of Rwanda. Now, whether that's the case behind the scenes is a whole other matter. I guess the rubber is going to hit the road on this whole situation if Rwanda actually starts to do something on their side militarily against the M23. I guess that is where we're going to see the reality of the situation. Let's continue. Over to Myanmar, which we've been following very closely here, as it seems like a massive story that is not getting the attention that it deserves in the general media here, which is a country that has a significant border with China that has a major problem with more armed rebels here. They took over a rare earth mining hub a few weeks ago. And the way I understand this, the way it's being described from these news articles, is that there are several areas or cities that produce rare earths. It's not just one location. That is my understanding. Because I look at this headline, which I'm going to share for you in a second, and I thought, haven't we heard this story before? But it's coming out just in the last few days. Rebel group takes key Myanmar border town, so that's new, and rare earth mining hub in setback for military regime. So it is not clear to me if this is a new rare earth mining hub that has been taken over, or if it's the old rare earth mining hub that has been discussed in previous articles, and now they've also taken over a Myanmar border town. And again, on the border of China. So not insignificant here. Let's read the story. This is the Associated Press. A powerful rebel group has seized a key trading town in northeastern Myanmar on the Chinese border, taking control of a lucrative rare earth mining hub in another setback for the military-led government, according to witnesses. The apparent loss of Kanpeti to the Kachin Independence Army leaves Myanmar's military in control of only one town with a border crossing, called Muse, and deprives it of potential profits from the mines that provide China with rare earth minerals critical for electric motors and wind turbines, as well as high-tech weapons and a broad range of electronics. Neither Colonel Nao Bu, the Kia's spokesperson, nor Thet Sui, spokesperson for the military, responded to multiple requests for comment, but several local media outlets reported that Kanpeti fell last week. The ongoing civil war and military restrictions make travel for journalists nearly impossible, perhaps why we're not seeing so many stories. But the reports were confirmed by witnesses by telephone. Video clips circulating on social media, which could not be independently verified, showed what was said to be a Kia member raising the group's flag at the tunnel through the mountain to China. Other clips showed a vast quantity of weapons allegedly captured by the Kia. We saw the leader of the military junta in Myanmar visit China just a couple of weeks ago. And, I imagine this must be raising some pretty big red flags for China. Because not only is a major portion of your heavy rare earth supply being taken away from you, seemingly, it's also a potentially hostile actor on your border, right? Because as we've seen from previous articles, to refresh our memory, China has been backing the military junta, who lost control of these rare earth mining towns, while the U.S., as we saw in an article from August, has been supporting the rebels. So quite a situation going on here. Now, just on these rare earth mines, let me give you some more details here. If we scroll down a bit, there is more detail from this Associated Press article. In Kashin's so-called Special Region 1, where Kanpeti is located, the location of the rare earth mining hub, the Kia since late September has been increasing assaults on a rival ethnic militia. So the Kia are the rebels, and they've been increasing their assaults on a rival ethnic militia called the New Democratic Army Kashin, which is allied with the government military and had provided border guard forces. And we heard also in previous stories that China was helping fund certain groups that were on the border. So one wonders if this is actually a China-backed force that was just defeated. Continuing with this article, the NDAK also controlled the web of small, unlicensed operations where heavy rare earth elements are mined, then sold directly to China's big state-owned mining conglomerates or through intermediaries. So, unlicensed operations, plural. And then more details here. There are more than 300 unregulated mines in the area, producing most of the $1.4 billion in rare earths for sale to China last year, quote, at a terrible cost to the environment and local communities, end quote, according to a report issued by London-based environmental group Global Witness in May. And finally, it's not clear how much of the profits flowed to the military government and how much directly to the NDAK, however, and while the loss of any revenue would be bad for the military, the fall of Kanpeti is not necessarily a game changer for the overall conflict, said Morgan Michaels, a Singapore-based analyst with the International Institute of Strategic Studies. Quote, this is another series of embarrassing losses for the regime, but may not significantly affect the regime's ability to wage war. China had already shut most of the border to dissuade the Kia's offensives, and the regime is thought to primarily generate revenue through other means than rare earths, end quote. So, quite a complex situation going on there in Myanmar. So, a wonderful show ahead of us today. We have Nathan Wright, a leadership coach for the mining industry, and he's going to talk about something that's very profound and probably doesn't get discussed enough, how the management style of leaders at mining companies impacts the overall financial results and the different kinds of leadership and the different techniques that bring about the best results. He's an author who's written books on the subject. He did a PhD on mining and leadership. So a fascinating interview and one which we can apply beyond the mining industry as well. So really looking forward to presenting Nathan Wright to you this episode. With that, just another big shout out to everybody at the International Mining Symposium, a wonderful conference that we had here in London. And thank you everybody for the warm words about the podcast and everybody who reached out and talked to me. Met a whole bunch of wonderful people. With that, if you want to find us online, you can find us at northernminer.com. You can find us on X at Northern Miner, and on Instagram at The Northern Miner, and on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, where we also host these podcasts, and wherever podcasts are available, including Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. And with that, let's turn to the news. And turning to the website, very interesting story from Henry Lazenby at the Northern Miner. China's supergiant gold discovery claim sounds aspirational, according to an expert at the World Gold Council. And this is dated December 2nd, so yesterday. The World Gold Council is skeptical about China's November 21st claim of discovering an $83 billion gold deposit in the southeastern province of Hunan. The Geological Bureau of Hunan Province said it had found more than 1,000 tons, or 35 million ounces, beneath the Wenggu goldfield in Binjiang County. The government-run Xinhua news outlet reported on November 21st. The claim saw widespread mainstream and social media coverage in the following week and a half. Officials said 300 tons, or 10.5 million ounces of gold, had already been identified within 2,000 meters of the surface and extrapolated total resources at 3,000 meters depth to reach the 32 million ounce figure. If it's true, you wonder if that's enough to hurt the gold market. Let's continue. Chen Rulin, a geologist at the Bureau, said he found visible gold in rock cores. Xinhua reported high-grade intercepts of up to 138 grams gold per ton at the 2,000-meter depth range. But World Gold Council senior market strategist John Reed says it's not that simple. Quote, the 1,000-ton potential resource sounds aspirational, end quote, he said Monday in an emailed response to the Northern Miner. Quote, the 300-ton figure appears more reasonable. Perhaps an inferred or indicated resource, much more drilling would be needed to turn this into a reserve, end quote, he said. He noted that Chinese mineral reporting standards do not align with global frameworks like Canada's NI 43101 or Australia's JORC code, so independent verification is critical. Furthermore, the global gold market, which produces about 3,600 tons or 127 million ounces of gold yearly, would see little impact from a mine producing 50 to 30 tons, or about 530,000 to 1 million ounces gold per year, roughly 1% of total supply, Reed said. So not a big deal, according to Reed, even if it were true, interestingly. And the article continues, the Chinese announcement referenced 150,000 meters of drilling and 40 identified gold veins. Those figures suggest much exploration activity has been done, but Reed noted deposits at 2,000 to 3,000 meter depths are rare and hard to develop. Quote, even if proven, such a deposit would take years to bring into production, end quote. And scrolling down the article, interesting final paragraph here, to add to the uncertainty, the People's Bank of China paused its record gold buying spree earlier this year. This further complicates the country's gold market. China's broader gold strategy remains opaque. And with all the talk on the internet, some people will say that China has far more gold than they are declaring. Interestingly, whether that's true or not is pure speculation. And as Jeffrey Christian has long said, the gold market is very much an opaque market. So interesting story there. Continuing on, the United Nations to deploy satellite-based monitoring to strengthen global mining safety standards. I think we could file this in the green metal category. Global insurance technology company Value.Space, which specializes in satellite-based monitoring and risk assessment, announced Monday a collaboration to deploy satellite-based monitoring and risk profiling to support United Nations work to strengthen mining safety and standards, led by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. The 2019 Brumadinho tailing storage facility collapse, which killed 270 people and caused $20 billion in losses, underscored the urgent need for improved safety. Satellite analysis after the disaster revealed warning signs as early as 15 months before the collapse, emphasizing missed opportunities for prevention. And finally, Value.Space founder Rejo Pold said, quote, by leveraging satellite monitoring, TSF owners and regulators will have access to actionable insights to prevent disasters before they occur. This proactive approach not only protects communities and ecosystems worldwide, but also bolsters global markets and financial stability by mitigating the economic consequences of catastrophic failures, end quote. Continuing on, we have a story by Cecilia Jamasmy, editor-in-chief of mining.com. Norway forced to pause Arctic seabed mining plans, so from space to deep-sea mining we go. Norway has paused its controversial plan to mine the seabed in Arctic-reaching territorial waters after the Socialist Left Party, also known as the SV, a small left-wing environmentalist group, secured an agreement to delay the initiative in exchange for supporting the national budget. The government had intended to issue its first deep-sea mining exploration licenses in early 2025. Under pressure from the SV, preparatory work has been now slowed, with the government highlighting that it would continue work on environmental impact assessments and regulatory frameworks. And here's a quote from Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store of the Labour Party, who said in an interview with private broadcaster TV2, quote, this is a postponement, not an end to the process, end quote. Continuing on the deep-sea mining front, India to auction first offshore minerals tranche worth more than $17.8 billion. This is Reuters via mining.com. India will auction its first tranche of offshore minerals, which is worth more than 1.5 trillion rupees or $18 billion. A government source directly involved in the decision-making told Reuters on Thursday. A total of 13 blocks will be auctioned as part of the first tranche, including 3 for construction and another 3 for lime mud. 7 out of 13 blocks will be polymetallic nodules and have not been valued yet, the source said. The source did not want to be identified as they are not authorized to speak to the media. The Federal Mines Ministry did not immediately respond to a Reuters email seeking comment. The ministry is expected to shortly announce the details of the auction. Very interesting. Continuing on, India and Mongolia in talks for preliminary mining pact. This is Reuters via mining.com. It really is the global news out here, isn't it? We have global mining news as our motto here at the Northern Miner, and it sure is global, isn't it? Let's look at the story. India is in talks with Mongolia to set up a preliminary pact that will focus on mineral shipments between the two Asian nations, an Indian government source with direct knowledge of the developments said on Thursday. Quote, the pact with Mongolia will focus on transit of minerals, end quote, such as coal and copper, said the source, who did not want to be identified as the deliberations are not public. The Federal Mines Ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment. So, very interesting over there. Turning to Australia, Northern Star Resources to buy De Grey Mining in $3.3 billion deal. This is Reuters via mining.com. Australian gold miner Northern Star Resources said on Monday it will buy De Grey Mining in an all-share deal valuing the small miner at $3.3 billion US as high gold prices spur consolidation in the sector. For Northern Star, the deal offers low-cost, medium to long-term growth through access to De Grey's Hemi Gold development project in Western Australia. It comes after a rise in gold prices and Australian dollar gold prices in particular, which hit a record above $4,240 Australian a troy ounce in late October, and have rallied by about a third in the past year. Quote, obviously gold is expensive, but it's a scrip deal, so we are happy with that, end quote, said Baden Moore of CLSA. Northern Star shares sank as much as 5%, however, while shares in De Grey rallied as much as 28%. Under the deal, De Grey shareholders will get 0.119 new Northern Star shares for each share held, implying an offer of $2.08 per share. Continuing on, Lithium Argentina picks Switzerland as another China-backed junior flees Canada. So these national security reviews, as well as, discouragement of China investing in Canadian-based mining companies is having an impact. So Lithium Argentina is moving from Canada to Switzerland. This is Blair McBride at the Northern Miner. Lithium Argentina is seeking to redomicile to Switzerland and change its name to Lithium Argentina AG following a corporate review and a new agreement with investor Ganfeng Lithium, the company said Friday. The company decided Switzerland was the best jurisdiction on strategic, commercial, and legal grounds, and would provide expanded financial flexibility and support its long-term growth plans. It also aims to move the Lithium Argentina group of companies' operational headquarters to Buenos Aires. Ganfeng Lithium, its joint venture partner in the Cauchery-Olaroz project, has entered into a 3-year standstill agreement with the Canadian company, it said Friday. Ganfeng has agreed that it won't acquire or facilitate the acquisition of a controlling interest in the company. Ganfeng holds 47% stake in the project that started production last year, and Lithium Argentina holds 45%. The move to the low-tax canton of Zug is still subject to shareholder, stock exchange, and court approval, but could happen early next year. The company plans come just 1 week after another Canadian developer, Solaris Resources, said its own move to Zug from Canada is advancing. The Toronto-based Solaris is leaving Canada after the federal government earlier this year began a national security review of China's Zijin Mining's plan to invest $130 million in its Warintza project in Ecuador. Solaris canceled the deal and decided to avoid such reviews by re-domiciling. It at first said it would move to Quito, Ecuador's capital. Finally, 2 years ago, Ottawa forced Chinese investors to divest from several lithium juniors with assets outside of Canada based on national security concerns. And in June, the government diverted a sale of $3 million worth of stockpiled rare earths mined in the Northwest Territory from a Chinese company to the Saskatchewan Research Council. Lithium Argentina said it would continue to trade on North American markets and be subject to public company reporting requirements under Canadian and U.S. security laws. Well, it sounds like a pretty easy way, frankly, to avoid the national security review. File this under unintended consequences, I suppose. Continuing on, Seabridge KSM Copper Gold Project in British Columbia faces another challenge. This is by a staff writer at mining.com. The Skeena Wild Conservation Trust and Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission, or SEITC, have filed a petition against Seabridge Gold's KSM mine, the latest objection to development of what is ranked the world's largest gold project. The petition alleges the mine's location threatens the Nass and Unak watersheds, which support several species of Pacific salmon, and Eulachon, which are candlefish, and that these fish are vital to nearby communities for culture, subsistence, recreation, and their local economies. It was filed in the BC Supreme Court against the Provincial Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy and KSM Mining, a Seabridge subsidiary. So the KSM Copper Gold Project in BC is hitting some hurdles. Continuing on, Trafigura rattles zinc market with huge orders for LME metal. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. Trafigura Group has ordered thousands of tons of zinc out of London Metal Exchange warehouses, fueling a rally in prices, according to people familiar with the matter. Orders to withdraw zinc from warehouses overseen by the exchange have surged by 97,000 tons over the past 2 days, the biggest jump in more than a decade. The move leaves stock available to other buyers and helped underpin a gain in prices since Monday. Trafigura, which runs several zinc smelters and is one of the world's biggest traders and producers of the metal, was behind the orders, said the people, who asked not to be identified due to the commercially sensitive nature of the matter. Spokespeople for Trafigura and the LME declined to comment. And here is some possible reasons. While the orders are the biggest seen in the zinc market in years, physical traders like Trafigura routinely withdraw large volumes from LME warehouses for a variety of reasons. Sometimes metal is shipped out to manufacturers in response to upticks in demand and shortfalls in supply, or is simply moved into cheaper storage locations elsewhere. Demands in the underlying market remain subdued, but concerns about supply are growing as the global zinc smelting industry contends with a sharp drop in operating margins. The processing fees paid to smelters for the cost of turning ores into refined metals have fallen sharply this year, raising the risks that some plants may need to curtail output. So that was on November 28th. Then we get this story on December 2nd from Bloomberg. Zinc's wild week may signal volatile era as supplies squeezed. Zinc could see more sharp price swings as growing tightness along the metal's supply chain leaves buyers exposed to sudden changes in availability. The material used to galvanize steel had a turbulent time on the London Metal Exchange last week, finishing almost 5% higher despite a 2.5% slump on Thursday. The spike was fueled by a withdrawal of huge volumes from LME warehouses, which stoked speculation of a potential squeeze on short position holders. The volatile week underscored tight supply conditions that analysts see persisting into next year. Any production cuts, either by miners or smelters, could produce the catalyst for more short-term price spikes, Shanghai-based analysts at the Guotai Hunan Futures Company wrote in a note. The level at which it's safe to buy on dips was moving higher, they added. Just a couple of headlines. De Beers closes 2024 with huge price cuts. It's by Cecilia Jamasmi at mining.com. Just a couple of lines here. De Beers, the world's largest diamond producer by value, is reducing the prices of its mined gems by more than 10% amid persistent market challenges that have prompted it to abandon earlier efforts to stabilize prices. The diamond miner, a unit of Anglo American that has been on the chopping block since May, had already tried giving customers more flexibility and the rights to refuse goods rather than lowering prices this year. Hopes were pinned on strategies such as renewed marketing efforts, the scrapping of man-made diamonds in its offering, and campaigns aimed at engaging younger consumers. And finally, among these moves targeting Zillennials, so that's millennials with a Z, the microgeneration born between 1993 and 1998 was seen as key. This group has driven a surge in demand for affordable, lab-grown diamonds, particularly in North America. So, natural diamond supply continues to struggle. And finally, Rio Tinto and Imperial College London launch Center for Future Materials. This is by a staff writer at mining.com. And just a paragraph here, the center will act as a hub for collaboration, bringing together 4 new academic partners: the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, the University of California, Berkeley, the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, and the Australian National University of Canberra. and it is part of a program to accelerate the development of new sustainable techniques and technologies needed to deliver the materials for the energy transition. Those are your news stories. Now, let's take a look at metal prices. And turning to metal prices, let's take a quick look at the bond market. For context, the U.S. 10-year bond is yielding 4.21%. That is down 0.08% from last week. The UK 10-year gilt is yielding 4.22%, and that is 0.12% lower than last week, so also lower. And the Italy 10-year bond is yielding 3.26%. That is 0.22% lower than last week. And the German 10-year Bund is yielding 2.06%. That is down 0.15% from last week. And the Japanese 10-year bond, bucking the trend, up 0.02% at 1.08%. Turning to precious metals, gold is trading at $2,667.40 per ounce. That is $44 higher than last week, so recovering after the Trump sell-off. Silver is trading at $31.41 per ounce. That is $1.10 higher than last week. Platinum is trading at $945.10 per ounce. That is $11 higher than last week. Palladium is trading at $986 even per ounce. That is $7 higher than last week. Turning to industrial metals, copper is at $4.08 a pound. That is a penny lower than last week. Zeroing in on that $4 area, again, it just recalls Dr. Copper and what this could mean for the larger economy. Iron ore is trading at $102.44 per metric ton. That is 50 cents higher than last week. Aluminum is lower at $1.18 per pound. That is 2 cents lower than last week. Lead is trading at 94 cents per pound. That is 2 cents higher than last week. Nickel is trading at $7.15 per pound. That is 20 cents lower than last week. And tin is unchanged at $13.12 per pound. Cobalt is also unchanged at $11.02 per pound. Lithium is lower at $10.78 per kilogram. That is 14 cents lower than last week. Uranium edges slightly lower at $77.50 per pound. That is 30 cents lower than last week. And zinc edges higher at $1.40 per pound. That is 3 cents higher than last week, continuing to do well here. So overall, precious metals recover after the supposed Trump sell-off, and industrial metals edge lower to sideways, with a couple of exceptions being zinc and lead. And those are your metal prices. Coming up, I'm very pleased to welcome to the show Dr. Nathan Wright, a leadership coach with a specialty in mining. We discuss the importance of leadership and really what that means in terms of how to get the best results out of a mining company. Oftentimes in the business world, people perform well at their job and then they're promoted into a management role without being given the skills that they need in order to be a great manager. So I hope this will be insightful for many people, or a refresher for those that have already learned these skills, and perhaps a few new ideas, and beautifully with a specialty on mining here. So Dr. Nathan Wright is coming up. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I will see you on the other side. Joining us today, I'm very pleased to welcome to the Northern Miner Podcast, very first time, Dr. Nathan Wright, leadership coach with a specialty in mining. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adrian. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's excellent to have you. As we were discussing beforehand, leadership is such a crucial topic in all facets of business, and it's actually weirdly kind of an underrated topic. Let's just start there. I mean, what do you think about that? Before we go into the background and how you got started and everything, just big picture, why is leadership important in mining?
So leadership's always kind of been viewed as a soft skill, right? It's something that they think that people just become. You're born a leader or you're not born a leader, right? And that's a very big misnomer, right? There's no such thing as somebody who's born a leader. It's the result of a whole lot of I guess I call it mentoring. If the people who are seen as born leaders, they've been lucky to have a whole lot of good people help mentor them along the way. And without it, you don't have the strategic business mind that you need when you're running companies or corporations, or the simple just making a decision. I mean, I use the term, taking ownership, right? And leadership is about taking ownership. And all day long, every human being is confronted with opportunities to either be an owner or a victim, and leaders take ownership. And that's kind of where my passion started in leadership, was to understand, how do we make those decisions? Why do we make those decisions? And is it something I can learn?
Indeed. So tell us then how you got involved in mining. In a sense, you have a very niche specialty with leadership in mining. I mean, that is your specialty. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. So how I got into this, right? I grew up in a mining town in Arizona. I saw the cyclic nature of mining, right? Every so many years, my dad was out of work, or he was on strike, or whatever it was, going back and forth. And as a kid, you don't pay attention to a lot of that stuff. But as I grew older, I wanted to know, how come that happened, right? Why was it? In the fact that it couldn't just be, somebody making decisions and it staying pretty fluid. So the importance to me started just because your father's out of work, and listening to him talk. He was third generation miner. My grandfather had the job that he had before him. And in my hometown, the senior class actually took a trip to the mine, which was just down the street from us. And we picked the job that we could walk into out of graduation. So, and that was kind of the process growing up. So as I started to understand the impact of the folks that were making these decisions, that's when I started delving into, it's truly was the leadership capability and the styles of the leaders that made the difference. So to get to my doctoral work, what I did was I chose leadership as a topic. And a lot of folks think that you could just pick your topic and go do a dissertation on it, and that's not true. You have to add to the body of knowledge, and leadership is one of the most researched topics on the planet. So I had to find a nuance to be able to do this as part of my dissertation. And after about 3 years of reviewing a lot of leadership material and research, I found that there had never been a study on the leadership of mining in and of itself, solely just mining. So I presented that to the review board, and they said, yeah, absolutely. Go tell us, about the leadership in mining. And I had to narrow that topic because that was pretty huge. So I chose 6 mining companies. And I also had to use a metric of how I'm going to measure what the leadership impact was. So I chose the profitability, utilizing the Woods McKinsey, evaluation of the operations profitability. So my dissertation was the correlation between leadership style in mining and the profitability of the operation.
Okay, excellent. I almost find it ironic that, here leadership is hugely researched, as you said. The PhD dissertation supervisors, you have to be more specific. It's almost overly researched. Yet there's a huge irony here, in my opinion, and you as an expert, tell me what you think. I think often what happens in organizations, as people work at an organization, at a company, and then they do well, and then they get promoted to be a manager, and they don't necessarily have the training to manage people. To your point, leaders aren't necessarily born. It's a skill set, arguably, right? You become a leader through learning and through understanding human nature. What do you think about that?
Well, that's exactly the truth, right? In fact, I myself, when I first got my first leadership role, was in a mining operation. And the Friday before, we were at the retirement party of my supervisor. And our general manager walked up to me and he said, hey, I got good news for you. Monday, you're the new supervisor. That was the extent of my training. Was Friday, I was a electrician, journeyman electrician in a mine. And Monday morning, I became a supervisor. And that's all I knew. That's the only thing that the company ever put into my education of becoming a leader. The rest of it was trial and error. And that gets expensive for a company, right? Because I can guarantee you, everybody always says you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And it's really true. You fail more than you succeed. And along the way, it probably cost my employer a lot of money because they didn't invest in the leadership training that was necessary. And the higher up I got into these companies, I started out frontline supervision. I worked my way to C-suite for a mining company, as the asset manager for the entire company's operations. And nowhere along that line did anybody ever say, "Hey, Nathan, we need to send you off to some training somewhere." So all of my education I pursued on my own so I wouldn't continue to fail to the cost of about $155,000 out of my pocket.
Wow. But to your credit, you did understand that you had to get training, because I actually think that maybe that is even not necessarily understood on a certain level in some cases. I mean, isn't that the case? So tell us a little bit before we get back to the niche, the more specifics about how you started to measure and address this topic of leadership in mining. Just back to your story, tell us briefly, if you can, how you evolved as basically someone with no training. Monday you're the manager or supervisor. How did you realize that you needed a skill set?
Well, and I'm going to give credit to the people that were around me, my father and my mother, but my father had been a leader in mining and followed the same path, right? He'd been promoted just like I had without any specific training. So where a lot of people have to run off to seminars to learn about some of the nuances and the trial and error that people go through, I could go to a dinner table where my grandfather sat, my father sat, and they had been leaders and had failed previously. So I got to learn from their mistakes. So that helped me a bunch, that not everybody gets that opportunity. And then again, got lucky. I say this is lucky. And I actually say this when I talk to people about it, that some of my supervisors within these mining companies that I worked at were good leaders. And I had good examples to follow. And I also had some bad. And I'm going to say, I don't want to say it's luck, but there's a whole lot of, I got lucky and I was able to pick out the good and the bad, and I borrowed from the good. I always say I stole shamelessly, and I learned not to do what I saw in a leader that I didn't like.
And just a final follow-up on this kind of process. Do you think failure is a prerequisite of leadership to a certain degree? Because nobody does anything properly the first time around. Like, in a sense, must one fail their way to success, as they say?
I think it's important because I do believe that I probably learned a lot more from those failures, but the failure is only beneficial if you do the root cause analysis on it, right? If you go back and figure out what the failure was and learn from it. I grew up being told it's okay to fail once, but don't fail at the same thing twice. And that's the mantra that I always, when I'm talking to other leaders, as I moved up in a company and I was promoting folks, I tried to make it a better transition for them by getting them some of the support that they needed. And again, that's not training. You can't train a leader, you have to develop them. And that's where I come from, right? And the way you develop them is you have to have a leader basically out in the field with them, because human beings don't learn well sitting in a chair. It's just not the way we work. If you think about, they always say that you learn the most between your age 0 and 5 years old. That's what the research shows us. And the reason for that is because if you think about during that time frame, how do you learn? You fall down, it hurts. You bang your finger and it hurts, So you do things, or you go to stick a fork in a light socket and whoever's taking care of you says, "No, don't do that. It's going to hurt." So there's a mentor with you those 5 years. And then at the 5-year point, at least in the US, you get sent off to school. And now you're put in a chair with 25, 30 other people, and somebody's standing up in front of you just thundering away 8 hours a day at you. And you're not being taught in a transformational type way. And we'll get into what all that means. You're just being preached to, if you would. And humans don't learn that way. That's just not how we learn well. I'm not going to say everybody, there's no absolutes, but most human beings don't learn well in that environment. So lucky for me is I did fail and I learned from those failures, but we all probably know people who fail and don't learn from those failures, and they continue to do so. And those are the examples that will serve us as how not to do things as well.
Indeed. And yeah, there's something to be said for that, transition from almost real world feedback that you're getting, as you say, from your 0 to 5 to kind of a abstract situation where it's all theoretical, it's all just thoughts, and you're not getting that real world pushback other than the note that you got on a piece of paper, which is still pretty abstract, to your point. So super interesting. Okay, so let's bring it to mining then. So you were mentioning profitability. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started to measure, so to speak, or understand what it is, the subject that you're discussing in your thesis, leadership in mining?
So the profitability side had been beaten into us, right? I mean, everybody in the world I grew up in was cost per ton. That's what drove our operation, right? Was the cost per ton, right? The world market pays X. You want to make it under that so that we make some money. And that's driven into your head. So the profitability side of the metric was cost per ton is what I used. So I was using the individual operations cost per ton as the metric on how the leadership styles affected that cost per ton. And then I had to develop a way to measure leadership style. And with that, I reached out onto the research that would, leadership has formally been studied and it's been documented for more than a century. And so you go out there, and part of a dissertation process is you have to read everything you can and find what's going to service your niche. And so what I did was I found it's called the full range leadership model, and I utilized that as the bones for the measurement tool that I built for measuring the leadership style of these leaders in mining. And then you have to elicit those folks to this full range leadership model instrument or tool or whatever fancy term you want to use is a questionnaire. And it asks abstract questions of them, and they self-rate themselves. And then they send it to so many subordinates, so many peers, and so many supervisors. It's called a 360. People have taken these. And then you find out what these groups of people think of what kind of a leader you are, answering the same exact questions. And then from that, you develop what they call the predominant leadership style of that individual. Now, we all move between all 7 different leadership styles throughout a day, but all of us have a predominant style. And that predominant style is what I zeroed in on to decide what the composition of the leadership team was, and then measured against their profitability to determine what was good and what was bad. Ironically, of the 6 companies that I chose to study, 5 all had a very similar predominant leadership style. And the one that was the most profitable had a completely different leadership style. So that was the biggest finding of my dissertation is the most successful company had what is known as a more transformational leadership style. And the others had a more what they call transactional, which is what most of the world is, where most of us are transactional in nature.
Fascinating. And just before we kind of dive deeper into the nature of, say, transactional and transformational leadership, how do you account for, you talk about profitability, but how do you account for, say, maybe this person here is not a great leader, but they happen to have an incredible deposit, so they're way more profitable than maybe the great leader over there with a okay deposit. How do you kind of adjust for, I guess, what you'd call chance?
And that was mostly driven off of my experience in mining. Okay. I was well aware that, if you got some big mining companies out there that though they have a poor predominant leadership style, they're still profitable because of their ore body. That is the nuance, I guess, if it was that I brought to the table when I did the study, right, was having the experience in the industry to know. I mean, if you take somebody outside the industry, they don't know the difference between 3% and a 0.3% ore body, or whatever it may be. So that I had to do that myself. That was something I did myself. I could measure it, like I said, I could get the reports, the financial reports of the company where they report all this wonderful stuff. And then I had to bring that to bear when I did the final determination of, because yeah, you're right. I mean, the company may be making money, but they have poor leadership. You can see some of that in the cost per ton versus what the market will bear, because poor leadership in the 2008 financial crisis, the companies that didn't shut down, maybe they curbed operations or whatever, it was because they had a great ore body, but they had terrible leadership and their cost per ton were so high, they couldn't remain profitable when the price of copper fell so drastically. And again, that one company continued to stay profitable, be it not as profitable, but they were still 10 cents below what the price of copper was during that financial crisis per ton.
So can you make the argument based on your research that it's worth it to invest in, say, leadership training then for your employees? Like, in a sense, can you start to come up with results saying, even though leadership training may be expensive, it's going to save you money in the end? Did you come across any of those kinds of conclusions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was able to, and I can provide that information to corporations. And that's what I do for a living now. That's what the company wants to know. What's my return on investment? So I am able to share how their leadership styles, we can benchmark what their leadership style is, right? Because until we know what their predominant leadership style is, I can't tell you how much opportunity there is. So we benchmark their leadership style. It's a hard skill, right? It's not a soft skill. It's something we can measure. And that you're not going to hear from a lot of the folks in this industry that I work with. They all want you to believe it's soft skills because none of them have ever led a team, especially in a mining operation. I'll go out there and say you're not going to find more than one or two coaches that have ever actually even led a mining company, much less even worked in a mining company. So being able to go out there and walk the walk with the leaders, it gives you a whole lot more credibility when you're doing the development with them than somebody who comes in and teaches a class in a conference room somewhere and says, now you're all leaders, go forth and lead.
Absolutely. We're almost back to the abstract versus kind of practical real world experience, which frankly, you can't learn from a textbook, unfortunately. Now, you mentioned transactional versus transformational leadership styles. Can you put a little bit of meat on the bone here for us as to what the difference is and how that might impact things and just what that means?
Absolutely. So transactional is what people would think, right? There's a transaction takes place. So in my dissertation, I found that the 5 of the companies were transactional and they managed by exception is what it was called. So management by exception means they put forth a number or a goal, you know, cost per ton, and then they wait for the company not to make it. And then they discipline for it, right? They go out there and I'm not going to say beat up folks for it, but they pound on people. It's called the gotcha leader. And that was the predominant style. And honestly is the predominant style in the world. Okay. That's where most leaders are. They put out a goal. You don't make the goal. They scream at you for it. The other transactional style is called contingent reward. So what that is, and you probably heard the term carrot and a stick. It's, the picture of a guy holding a stick in front of a donkey to get him to move. And if he does well, he lets him eat the carrot. And if he doesn't, he hits him on the head with the stick to get him to move. And that's the other style, right? That's transactional, right? There's a transaction takes place. If you do good, I'll reward you, give you a bonus, give you a raise, whatever it is. If you do bad, I'll do whatever, fire you or whatever that is. So those are the 2 transactional styles that are out there. And they are the most prevalent across all industry, with the management by exception being the most prevalent. Transformational, on the other end, is hugely misused. Okay, people, I'm a transformational leader, but they don't understand what transformational leaders are. So it falls into 4 basic categories of transformational leader. One of them is called idealized influence, which is the charismatic, some say godlike leader. You think of people in those areas like a Mother Teresa or a Nelson Mandela or somebody along those lines, right? People follow them because, it's their charisma and stuff that, Ronald Reagan, I guess, would be falling into that kind of thing.
It's almost cult-like in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very successful, but there's a difficulty, right? When you change leaders, there's also disadvantages to it. There's they call it inspirational stimulation. And what that is that you're basically, you're the cheerleader, I guess, if you would, right? They're inspirational folks, right? They're out there, everybody knows what they're doing. People will say, rowing the boat the same in the same direction, and you got the leader cheering you on he's not necessarily out front leading like the idealized influence, the charismatic one, but they're there cheering the group on, they're supporting the group. There's the individual consideration, which is where the leader cares about you as a person instead of treating you as a number. Again, all of us probably have examples of companies we work for with both of those, right? Where you were just a number and a cog. A lot of big corporations tend to fall into this, right? Doesn't mean you can't have a leader within the organization that treats folks with respect, or not necessarily, respect's not the right word, but as individuals.
Where you feel truly valued as a human being, that it's almost beyond numbers here. It's like, whatever happens, it's like, we still like you as a person sort of thing, and appreciate you.
Exactly. Right? And then the intellectual stimulation is the one where they value your opinion, right? They listen to you. You're part of the solution, right? And you see that where, a leader doesn't just say, hey, you guys go out and do that. They'll say, I need this accomplished. And the team gets together. We value their intelligence, their skill sets, and let them come up with the solution for it, right? most of us would say, if you think about it, who's the best boss you ever had? And you're going to find out that they probably had one of those four aspects, if not all of them. And if you think about the worst boss you ever had, you're probably going to think about the person that was transactional, right? They gave you a number when you didn't meet it. They were upset with you, or they held a carrot out in front of you that you never got to, right? They just kept it out of your range. So you were always shooting for the carrot, but at least you never got the stick. That's the difference between transformational and transactional in a nutshell.
Now, you were saying, interestingly, because I don't think it's a given, you were saying that the top performing company embodied the transformational style. And, I remember my first job, I was a graphic designer over in Montreal. One of the big takeaways from that job, to your point about the transactional leadership, people just want to be heard, is what I realized, because I felt like people didn't care what I had to say. And it doesn't really bring about a great camaraderie or even making you want to work hard for that person, right? Because you just feel like, again, to your point, you feel almost dehumanized. And it's like, why is this person even paying me? Now, you're mentioning, though, that the transformational style actually gave the best result. Is that the case?
It did. It gave the best results. And in all of the research that I did, there are environments where, folks would say, oh, transactional is necessary, right? And people always throw the military at me. They say the military is very transactional and it needs to be. You follow a chain of command. But if you look at the elite forces of the military, let's use the Navy SEALs, just because I'm an old Navy sailor. The SEAL teams don't work on hierarchy. They work on individuals working as a team. So even in the military, where people would think that it has to be a chain of command, the most elite military units that operate on this planet don't follow a transactional leadership style. They're transformative. They listen to everybody. They inspire each other. Those are the types of leaders. So I'm not saying there's never an opportunity for when transactional is right. I would revert back to if you had a fire and you need one guy in charge or one gal in charge directing the efforts of putting out a fire, you're probably not going to sit back and ask everybody's opinion. Okay. So it's not that it's always wrong. It's just that overall, the predominant style of the person, if they're rooted in transactional, you're basically creating a robot. If you're leading people from a transactional standpoint, you're maintaining status quo. You're not creating new leaders. You're building nothing but a bunch of robots. And then you find yourself, when that leader retires, you're going to find another head robot, and you got probably have to hire them from outside the company because you didn't bother training anybody because of that transactional nature. Whereas if you have transformational type approaches, you're always building that next leader, so it's not a title ever. Leadership's not a title. If you have followers, you're a leader. And I actually share in my book that first time I realized I was a leader, I was 10 years old. I was playing Little League Baseball and we were tied in the final game of the season. And all of a sudden, everybody's looking at me to get a hit. And all of a sudden, these guys were relying on me. They were following my example. At the time, I didn't realize it. But as I grew older and started studying this stuff, I realized that's the first time I realized that I was in a leadership position. And people don't think about that, right? 10-year-old Little League Baseball player is a leader. So leadership isn't a title. It's never a title, as a matter of fact, because we all know people with some pretty high up titles that aren't good leaders. We've been living it. We live it in our political arenas all over the world, right?
You're reading my mind there, Dave.
So that's some of those, if you use the example of poor leadership, you can point to an awful lot of politicians worldwide.
Very interesting. Now let's start to wrap up here. Tie it all together. You've written some books. You've done some research. Your niche is in mining. Wrap it up for us in the sense, what can people do? What's some actionable advice? What haven't we talked about here? Help fill the gap for us here on what people can do to become better leaders in mining, what they should be thinking about.
I'm going to use a little bit of the research on this, right? So we've seen over the last 20 years a shift from leaders being developed up through the companies to earn the position of CEO or whatever the wonderful title is that they get in mining and in all industry. And that used to be the norm, right? The person would work their way up to the top, hopefully developing some of these skills because we weren't teaching them still. Now we've gone to a leadership philosophy where we're pulling in folks that haven't worked their way up through companies, right? They're more marketers, they're accountants, because the boards of directors have shifted from the folks that had worked their way up to bankers and stuff, worried about the bottom line. So what I tell people is it starts one person at a time, right? There's no quick button to fix all this because we've been tearing it down for several decades. So we got to start with one person. It's got to be supported from the top down, but it can be a grassroots. Myself, I started as a grassroots thing. I pass it on to the people above me as well as the people below me, right? Trying to make the people above me better. And hopefully they're doing the same thing, and ultimately we'll get ahead of it. But it has to be development. It can't be training. It's a long-term investment, just like anything that makes a company successful. And to do it, there has to be some mentorship. It has to be somebody who is the type of leader, predominant leadership style that you want, mentoring those that are trying to get there. What I teach when I'm talking to leaders at all levels and stuff, right, is that our goal is not to manage today, it's to lead into the future. Everything we can do to, be proactive, for lack of a better word, we should be doing, right? Too many leaders are concentrated on the bottom line today. Well, a leader is to spend 80% of their time working on the business, not in the business. And that's where the leadership aspect comes in.
Okay, excellent. And final question for, we have a lot of students that listen to this podcast. Let's say they want to run a mining company, they want to be CEO. What should they do to get ahead of things, to get a good start? Do you have any advice for them?
I'm going to go back to, experience is the best teacher. So some of the best mining CEOs that I've ever worked for and with, started out in the mine. If they're young engineers, the best person I ever worked for in the mining industry is a gentleman named Steve Holmes, right? He's the COO of First Majestic Silver today. He used to be a frontline guy in Phelps Dodge Morenci when I first met him, and he started out in the field with us, working alongside us. I was turning wrenches and he's yelling and screaming about production. And today we're still friends and he's running a silver company. He's run several companies in his lifetime. But that's where I tell young engineers, right? Schooling is great, but it teaches you nothing. I hate to say it that way. I mean, I got lots of fancy degrees, but
I was going to say you have a PhD, so you can speak with some authority on this subject.
and I have in front of Congress, I've actually got an opportunity to speak about this. And if you look at a job description today, the first line is engineering. Some kind of degree is required, and a degree doesn't teach you how to lead anybody. They don't teach leadership in school. It's something that you're going to have to learn after the fact. So I tell young students, keep your education in context, right? 5% of what I do relies upon all the education that I have. 95% of what I do comes from over 4 decades of actually doing.
Fantastic. And where can people find more information about the books that you've written, as well as your services? Tell us, where can people find you online?
My company is Transformational Performance Solutions. So it's just TPS-solutions.com. Then in the online for purchasing the books, they're sold in Barnes & Noble, Amazon, just about any place you can purchase a book, you'll find. My recent book's called The Right Leader, a little bit of play on my name, not just any leader. But there are several others that are out there that discuss all aspects. And you'll see the constant bringing it back to mining because that's home to me, right? I'm 4th generation and it's my life. And I've always loved mining and enjoyed my time working alongside the miners in the field.
Dr. Nathan Wright, author and leadership coach with a specialty in mining. Thank you for joining us on this week's Northern Miner podcast. Come back again.
All right, sir. I appreciate your time and I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you once again to Dr. Nathan Wright for appearing on this week's podcast. And thank you, everybody, once again at the International Mining Symposium in London. It was a pure joy to talk to so many interesting people. We got some great guests lined up in future podcasts as a result of this meeting. So again, just a reminder of the value in meeting people in real life. And thank you, dear listener, for continuing to support this program. If you want to help out the podcast, please leave us a review in the Apple Podcast directory, share it with your friends, and until next week, take care.